Alright, here's another DIY customization for my mini crawler, Losi mini crawler. You may have seen previously on RCC threads and stuff, I created what's known as the Franken axle, and essentially it's XR tubes kind of just slid over top of the MRC pumpkin and shafts or tubes, so that you can use XR10 shafts. You get a hell of a lot more steering angle. You use XR10 knuckles and C's, you get a much better steering angle than your normal mini rock crawler. Way more steering angle. So in addition to that, I'm going to be redoing this axle, but that's not part of this video. In addition to that, the transmission in these trucks is notoriously weak. You can get an upgraded aluminum transmission, however, it has an aluminum lockout which strips out, so you're better off to stick with the plastic gear, which has the steel lockout screwed into it, but then you strip out the gear. So either way, you're screwed. So what I have thought about and am devising, I hope will work, is I got this nice bag from my friends at A-Main Hobby. Wicked cheap shipping to Canada, that's why I use them. Other sites could learn from them. I don't know how they ship stuff to me for $3, but I'm not going to question it. I'm just glad that they do. So what I've got in here, I've got some gears, because this video is actually for Crawler Ted, because these gears he blows out every time he turns his truck on. So what I am looking for, the part I'm looking for, actually I didn't even get from A-Main. I got it from online on eBay, but some of the other parts I got from A-Main this is half of it anyway. I just threw the other half on the floor. Let me get that. Alright, so you may recognize this. This is a transmission out of a traxxas. A Revo, a mini Revo, mini slash, mini summit, whatever you want to do. That's what this is from. So I am going to attempt to put this in here. I don't know if it's going to work, but I'm going to try my damnedest. Because this is a lot stronger transmission. I've never blown one of these up, and I got my mini Revo running on 3 and 4 cells sometimes, doing standing backflips, like amazing traction and torque. And I've never had an issue with one of these transmissions. So I figure if I can retrofit it into there, make this thing bomb-proof, along with the front axle that I already did, it'll be unstoppable. So I'm going to get to this. I'm not going to video the whole process because I'm sure there's going to be a lot of trial and error, and I don't want to waste a lot of time on it. So I'm just going to, once I figure it out, if I figure it out, I will tell you guys how I did it. I'm not going to go through step by step, but that's the plan anyway. Put this in there. Okay, I just want to show you guys this. This is the mini Revo transmission. The first thing we want to do in this, because it's a crawling application, is we want to underdrive this thing. We want to lower the gear ratio so that it will crawl better and go slower. So that's really easy actually with the mini Revo transmission. And I should open the thing the other way so that you guys can see this a little better. So I'm just gonna put it back together, maybe, if it decides to go back together, and open it up the other way. This is really simple with these transmissions, super easy to underdrive them. I'm surprised it wasn't made for crawling. So we just pull this drive shaft gear out, throw it off to the side, we don't need it right now. We'll pull this gear out. As you can see, that gear comes off, it's just on a little hex thing. And then this little gear, same deal. Look at that, same hex. Put the big gear on the little metal one, put that back in. Put the little gear on the shaft, put that back in. Put our drive shaft gear back in. Ta-da! Underdriven. Underdrives it considerably. Look at how slow it goes now when you twist the spur shaft there. Goes super slow, so that's good. That's what we want for crawling, I assume. I don't know. It might be a little bit too much with the reduction in here and the reduction in the drive shafts. I don't know exactly what the ratios are and stuff. I never really looked it up. I just figured crawler, slower, not a bad thing, right? So, and if worst case is that simple to switch it back later if it needs to be switched back. So that's the underdrive on the Mini Revo. I think it'll be useful in this application, maybe not in all applications, but will be for this for sure. Comparison shot for you. This is the Revo transmission, this is the MRC transmission. The MRC transmission is actually considerably bigger. I mean, it's not exactly fair because it's got the motor plate and the spur and all that stuff on it, but even if you just look at the hunk of plastic that it is, it's considerably bigger and bulkier and a lot, I would say, heavier. I'll weigh it before I put it in there. I'll strip down the Mini, this one, and weigh it against there, but just to see what we're at. I mean, weight, not a big deal, but at the same time, it's the Mini class. Weight is a big deal because the less weight you can have up top, the more of an advantage you get, right? So this is how I want this one to sit. In the Mini Revo, it's actually supposed to sit like this because the drive shafts actually sit below chassis level in the Mini Revo, but I want it to mirror the or be the same as the MRC chassis because you want the motor as low as possible. The Mini Revo chassis, the motor is relatively high, and I'm not going to be able to have this sticking out the bottom of the skid in the MRC, so I'm going to try to have it mounted kind of like that, or maybe like this, with the motor underneath this part here. I'm not sure how it's going to work, but we'll go from there. Okay, so I got the Mini Revo transmission stripped down, or the MRC transmission stripped down. This is the first time I'm weighing them just to compare. I'd say they're pretty close to even. I'd say the the MRC one is just slightly heavier than the Revo one. I did check inside my Mini Revo, and I did have all the stock gears, all nylon, except for this top shaft is brass, which is normal. That's how it is. And then the steel lockers. So we'll put that on the scale first. 35 grams for the MRC. I haven't seen this. I'm just doing this for the first time, so we'll see if I'm right or if my hands are funny. 33 grams. So you save 2.5, 3 grams. Minor, but at the same time helpful. So there you go. Alright, so another notable thing, I'm trying to mock up the spur here. So what I did was I took the Mini Revo spur and I put that on there, the backing plate, because it's supposed to have a slipper clutch, so I put the backing plate on there. Then I took the MRC spur and I put that on with a 6x10 bearing in between them, so that it would center the spur on the backing plate, because the backing plate's not intended for it at all. The problem I'm coming across now is I need something that's big enough. I don't actually want that bearing to be a bearing. I don't want it to allow it to spin. So I need something that's bigger than the 10 mil to push down on the actual plastic and not push down on the bearing. So I've come up with a solution for that as well. It does involve a few parts. It's not exactly pretty, adds a little bit of weight, but it's the way to make it happen. I'm sure other people are going to have ideas and improve on this, and I really hope they do, because I would love to have those ideas, because I'm just trying to get this ball rolling and everybody can improve on it as we go. So I'm going to put that on to the MERV transmission just like that. And so now I needed something that would put pressure on that backing plate so that this doesn't spin, because right now it's spinning freely. This center shaft is not spinning at all, and the spur is just spinning, and this motor is going to be here spinning, and the spur is going to be spinning, and the truck's going to be going nowhere. So after I had that 6x10 bearing in there, I got another bearing. This is standard 10x15 bearing. It's used in XR10 steering knuckles, AX10, Wraith, all that stuff. So I'm going to put that over top, and that's going to fit perfectly around the 6x10 bearing, and it's going to sit up on top of the plastic so that when pressure is put on there, the pressure is put through the plastic right onto the backing plate, and your spur is going to stop spinning. It's still spinning now, so then I grabbed this piece. I don't know what this piece was. It was part of the spur assembly for the MRC, basically to lock the spur, but this piece is perfect because it fits on the shaft, because that's what it's made for, and it sits right on top of that other bearing. So then I'll just throw the nut on there and grab my driver and pin it through the back so that I can tighten down that spur. And just crank that down as hard as you can before you think you'll break it, because you don't want it to spin. So now that's not going to spin. If I hold this, if I pin this spur shaft there, I can crank on it and it will move eventually, but it does take a lot of effort. So that's going to be good and strong. It's not 100% solid, but pretty damn good. It's not going to slip. Unless you're really cranking on it, in which case you probably want it to slip so you don't rip gears apart. And it'll just slip a little bit, and then hopefully you'll be smart enough to pull your truck out of that hole that you just stuck it in and not damage the thing. So that's the spur. Now I just need to find the mounting plate. I might use the MRC mounting plate. It should fit on there half decent. It's got the slotted hole for adjustments. I might have to do a little bit of tweaking on here, a little bit of cutting to get it to fit on there so that the motor will hit the spur. That was another advantage using the big spur. This plate, if I center that on there and I put the motor in here with that spur and that pinion, I should be pretty damn close with the mesh, because that's how it was set up essentially before. Realistically, that's not changing any. The spacing between this pin and the motor shouldn't change. So this plate should be a good donor plate. I'll have to do some cutting, drill some new holes, but I think it should sit on there pretty nice, and then I'll have to figure out how to mount this thing to the skid. Alright, so what I'm going to have to do is I'm going to have to put that on there as mentioned. So I've only got one of these plates. I don't want to spend money if I don't have to, if I screw it up or whatever. So well, that brings us to arts and crafts time on this build. What I did here was I just threw this on a piece of paper, traced around it with a pen. I'm going to use some scissors, cut this out, lay it on here how I want it, trim it where I want it, make sure that it's perfect before I start hacking this up. Once I got this figured out, lay it on top, draw some lines, mark lines, hack this thing up. So I can trace it on this as many times as I want, won't cost me anything. If I cut that wrong, it's going to cost me a new plate. I don't know how easy it's going to get, how quick to get it, and I can't really take that chance. So, arts and crafts. Use a paper template. Save you a lot of time, a lot of money, a lot of headaches. Takes me 10 seconds to trace this thing out and cut it out. So, it'll take me a couple of weeks to order one of these in. Not my idea of a good time. Alright, so I ran into a bit of a snag. I did do my template thing, but apparently it wasn't very accurate. Having an issue. I even did some clearancing on this case here. I cut off that one mounting point, which I'm not sure if that was a good idea, but I cannot get the motor close enough to the spur because the case is designed differently. So I ran into a bit of a hiccup here. This is a 60 tooth spur. I'm gonna see if I can find a 48 pitch, maybe 70 tooth, 65 tooth maybe, and see if I can just space that out a little bit. That way I can just mount the plate just like it is, and it'll mesh up with the motor, and the motor will be really low. And that, if I could put it in the truck like that, it would be super narrow, so it would actually fit inside the truck for the most part, which is a problem with the MRCs. You always have the motor sticking way out the side because of the current transmission setup. But if I could get that mounted just like that, just put a little bit bigger spur on there, that'll gear me lower again, and then I think it would narrow up the transmission a little bit. It may end up being about the same, but I think it would narrow it up a little bit. And then I could have it set up just like this and mount it up in the truck just like this. And if I could get it to sit like this, mounting should be relatively simple. I could just find some standoffs to go from these down to the chassis plate. As well, there's this one on the back down to the chassis plate. There was another one there, but as I said, I clearanced that out so that I could get the motor closer, so I would hopefully reach it, but it wasn't reaching, so I don't have that as a mounting option, which is okay. I mean, 3 should be sufficient. I could just run some 3mm screws with some standoffs that go down to the tranny plate, and it would sit just like this on the tranny plate. Let's see where it would be. Maybe that won't work. Maybe the tranny plate's not long enough for that, because these were the stock mounting holes here, and so I think if I went from these holes down, I would end up right on top of the link mounts. So that, as you can see, wouldn't work so well. So I'd have to find another mounting option. I mean, even if I can just screw into these somehow or something, I'm sure I could figure that out once it gets to that point. But if I could get the motor to mount up just like this, and I could get the transmission to mount there, I mean, that, I'm not sure if that would really narrow it up a lot, but it would, I think it would work pretty well. And the biggest issue here is not trying to lighten it. I'm not trying to narrow it. I'm not trying to do any of that stuff. All I really want to do is strengthen it by putting the Revo transmission in there. If I do any of those other things, that would be a benefit. I'll take it, but that's not really my goal. So I'm going to try to find a bigger spur. I don't have any 48 pitch anything because I don't use it. I have 32 pitch in all of my stuff, so I'm going to do some research, see if I can find maybe a 65, 70 tooth, see if that will bring it out just enough to match up with the pinion. I could even pinion up a little bit if I spur up and keep it the same ratio for the most part, but I'm going to see what I can find. I know a couple of guys have some spare part bins I can raid, so I'm going to see what I can find and go from there. So this is going to be on hold for a couple of days while I find some parts, but so far it still looks promising. I mean, it's DIY. It's not going to be easy. It's totally different. I may even end up in the end just going stock Revo the whole way through and put on the motor plate for the Revo and have the motor coming out this side. It's wouldn't necessarily be ideal, but at the same time it may not be a bad thing either. If it's on the bottom coming out the front, the only problem is the chassis are so narrow, especially with the custom chassis, that if you had the motor coming out this way, you really couldn't, because it wouldn't clear the chassis. It would have to be like center so that it could clear between the chassis plates, and that's pretty unrealistic. So but well, I'll keep going with this, see where we end up. Worst they can do is fail, which is what the MRC tranny is already. Fail. Alright, there's the mounting for the motor plate. It's not pretty, but it's effective. Motor is mounted on there underneath. Again, I had a clearance in there a little bit. If I put it up standing on the two little legs, the motor is just off the ground. It's kind of hard to do it and hold the camera here. The motor is just off the ground, so it should clear the skid when the transmission is on the skid. Problem is, it is fixed. There is no adjustment. I could hog out this hole a little bit to get a little bit of downward adjustment, but there's no upward adjustment. I'm gonna have to clearance this a little bit to allow that pinion to not rub on there, because I don't want that to rub through and eventually break the shaft there. But I've only got the 2 screws on the top because, again, I had to clear off that 1 screw hole on the bottom. So I'm hoping it'll hold up for me and not flex too much and allow the pinion and the spur to disengage. But because I have no adjustment here, I'm going to have to get perfect pinion and spur for perfect mesh, and I will not have any adjustment with that. So once I have my gearing set, that's how it's going to be, whether I like it or not. So I've just got to do some measuring and figure out the distance between the pinion and spur and go from there, see where I end up as far as gearing goes. Alright, so I know I was supposed to be coming back and updating you guys on this, and I kind of just got working on it and one thing led to another, and I pretty much got it working. So here's how it ended up. I know there's not much way to explain it with it making sense, but basically I took the MRC motor plate, I hacked it up and made it fit on there with my Holmes motor. I did some extensive shaving in there so that the motor could get close enough to the case that the mesh would work okay. I'm running a traxxas 18 tooth pinion with the stock spur. I don't know what that is, 60 tooth? Yeah, 60 tooth. I've got the MIP mounted up, you can see there. I used a couple of standoffs to mount it to a custom skid that I built. You could use your existing skid, but I didn't want to drill holes in mine, so here's a custom skid. I did have to mount the links to the outside because I got lazy and didn't want to put them inside. I thought maybe the side plate of the chassis would prevent them from moving where they need to, because they kind of have to come out here. They kind of go from here and go out for the lowers. So I thought maybe the skid plate would prevent them from doing that. So I just moved them to the outside. That may change in the future. Also, my standoffs were a little bit in the way for them to be mounted inside as well. So I put the two standoffs in the rear, one on either side of the drive shaft. The front I only got one standoff because that other mounting spot that's supposed to be right here I had to shave off so that the motor would sit in there nice and tight. Like I said, I did some extensive shaving in there behind the motor. I actually went through the gear case. You can see that little white spot in there. That's actually a piece of a gear or a shaft because there's no case there anymore. I had to shave that extensively to get that small of a pinion. And I did some research on the gearing of these, and this will actually put me at almost exactly the same gearing as the MRC transmission with the stock gearing that I had in there. I think it was a 1460. This is 1860, but with the transmission gear flip in this one, it brings it down to actually slower than the MRC transmission. So gearing up on the motor, not a big deal. You end up essentially the exact same. So I obviously haven't got this soldered up yet. All the electronics are still sitting there. So I haven't got a chance to test it, both for durability or for functionality at all, really. So I'm hoping that'll be the next step. But I'll get this video out now, and I can show you guys a functionality, durability test later when I get it on the rocks.